It's great.
I already made a joke about my coffee. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Hi, Nate.
Hi, Melissa.
Nice to see you. I was just saying that I was making jokes about my coffee because it's definitely super late for me in Paris, but I'm so happy we're having this conversation. I've been a massive Notion fan for a very long time. I'm sure so many people in this chat are also big Notion fans, and one of the reasons why people love Notion outside of the amazing tool is the amazing content that you guys have been created for so long. So it is such an honor to actually have you on the Content Summit today to speak to us. Before we get into the chat and talk about storytelling and content and all these great things, I just want to do a tiny bit of housekeeping. So feel free to react in the chat to what Nate is saying. But if you have questions that you want me to ask Nate, make sure that you ask them in the Q&A so we can actually upvote should you want to see one more than other ones, and then we can also push them onto the screen so that Nate sees them and doesn't have to like hear to my French accent and not be sure to what I'm saying. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A and we'll make sure to answer them. And Nate, I guess we're ready to go. Are you?
Yeah, thank you for the nice intro. Appreciate everybody staying up late to make it happen, and everybody who's watching. So thank you so much for having me.
Sweet. So Nate, you've been at Notion for 3 years, I believe, almost 3 years. But prior to that, I was doing some research, and you've been a copywriter, you've been a growth marketer, you've been a journalist. I didn't know that, and I can definitely see where the storytelling gets into the work that you're doing now. Storytelling is in your DNA. I saw, and this is like big fangirl energy, but I saw that you've been published in the New York Times from the Modern Love column, which is one of my favorite things in the world. So before we get into any sort of storytelling, like, can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, for sure. So I got my master's in writing. I received a fellowship, went to University of San Francisco. It's a 2.5 year program, and like the great part about that is you just write a ton. You don't need like an MFA to be a good writer, but what it does is it just like forces you to like write and read a lot, which is great. Um, and I wrote a story for a workshop, and I tried to actually like embody the workshop methodology in some of our like content pitch meetings and content reviews, and like print it out. Everybody goes around the room talking. But yeah, I wrote it for a workshop and kind of like submitted it on a whim, actually, because it felt like it fit the column. And I remember finding out that they accepted it when I was on my bachelor party in New Orleans. So it was kind of a fun time to find out about that. And yeah, it was a fun thing to write.
It must have been. I wonder if I would have thought, is this a prank from my friends, like saying that I just got into it, or is this is cool? This is really cool.
There's plenty of
So
pranks that weekend for sure. Luckily, that wasn't one of them.
so today we're going to talk about like something that's really dear to your heart, which is like how to create relatable content through storytelling. And this is something I guess you and Notion is really amazing at. So I guess I'll just kickstart with a question, which is probably the most basic in the world. But can we talk about a little bit about like what's the difference between just storytelling and then creative storytelling, and when it comes to like doing it for a brand?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's not like simple. I think it's super open ended, which is interesting. I think like hopefully good storytelling resonates across like whether you're doing it for like a creative writing class or telling your brand story. Um, I think like what at the core of like what makes a good story, in my opinion, is tension. And I think like a lot of brands specifically and people too are kind of afraid to use tension a little bit. Um, Whether they think it, makes them like look weak or the brand look weak or anything like that. But it's so important to help build empathy with your reader. Um, so the way that I approach it is usually like trying to use creative writing techniques in like any marketing content. And the reason I try to do that is because I had a writing teacher who once told me that like the goal of your writing is just to get somebody from the start to the end. And so unless somebody can find like value in your content, unless they uh, find it interesting, just they want to read it. That's always my goal with anything I do. So can I like use creative writing techniques like attention, um, character development, which even if your character is your product, um, how can you use these to like tap into like brand storytelling and product storytelling?
Yeah, that's definitely great advice. And I could see, like, I think someone in the chat is mentioning like the transition that you must have done from working in journalism to working for a company like you're doing now, and you're taking all this knowledge and all this insight and bringing it into a company role. I think it's really really interesting and really amazing. Um, you kind of tapped on a little bit like what makes great creative storytelling. I think I have like a follow-up question to that, which is, and I think Notion does an amazing job at this. This is why I think it's so interesting. It's like what makes the content, and even more so when you think about company and like brand content, what makes it relatable? Like how do you go beyond just thinking personas and ICPs and like all these different things? And how do you just stop and think, what's gonna make my content relatable, human? Like how do you think about this process?
Yeah, it's super important. And like the way that well, first off, let me even take a little bit of a step back. I think Notion's brand lends itself to this type of storytelling. And that is really like a big testament to our former head of marketing, Camille Ricketts. She did an amazing, amazing job. She started the first round review. So she really like laid that foundation. But like to make your content relatable, I often think that you have to tap into like real human emotion. Um, and like there's different altitudes at which you can work with human emotion. You can get too specific and you run the risk of like isolating certain readers. And so I find when you want to speak to the broadest like swath of people, you really have to tap into like, whatever like the 10 like core human emotions are, like happiness, sadness, like these kind of like desires and cardinal desires. Um, and there's like another layer to it too, in my opinion. And this is like another kind of like creative writing technique is this goes back to tension really, but there's a couple different kinds of conflict that you can use. The first one is acute conflict. So that's like what's happening like right at the surface level. And then there's also chronic conflict. And that's kind of like the why behind like something is like upsetting to somebody. And you have to be able to use both really. So like, let me give you an example. Uh, Maybe your significant other like never does the dishes and you don't feel appreciated or something. Um, if my wife is listening, like um, this is not like a passive aggressive statement. It's just an example. But yeah, so if you might never like feel like appreciated, but like why is that? Maybe it's like they never do the dishes or they never say thank you. I mean, it could be like a million different things. And for me as a reader, I might not like understand somebody not feeling appreciated from doing the dishes, but I can understand like not feeling like cared for, I guess. So kind of like understanding, like getting into that why, I think is really like the core of making content relatable, because like we all share these emotions really. We all experience them differently, of course, but being able to tap into those, especially for content marketing, I think like it's just such a way to connect to your readers beyond than like, hey, like this product is going to help me or something like that. So yeah, that's kind of like one way that I think about it. Um, and then the other one too is like I kind of break out my writing process into two parts. The first one being like what I want to say, and the second one being like how I want to say it. I think the first one is the hardest often, and the second one is a little easier for me, and people kind of experience it differently. Um, but really spending some time with that, like what you want to say. Like I say, like write a crappy first draft, like cover your delete button, really explore all of these things, and don't even worry about like refining it at all yet. And so I think like yeah, tapping into that emotion and spending time with it is like super important. I think it's like in the age of like just trying to get stuff out as fast as possible. I think a lot of people skip that.
That's a really good point, and it kind of goes to, we're starting to seeing some questions in the chat, but it goes to what Victoria is asking, and I'm going to share her question on the screen just now. But like, how do you manage the online short attention span in order to create compelling content? I think that's an amazing question actually, because there's just so much up there. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's so important. And I like make your intro really good, and that sounds like kind of obvious. If I could just like be somebody who wrote intros, like I would love that because it's like it's tough, it's a challenge. So I think like you have to really have a strong hook, and like often like I have found the best way to do that is to try to tap into those like emotions, making it relatable, finding the tension. Um, because like once you're able to connect with the reader early on, I find better success in like moving them through a piece of content. And of course, like it doesn't always have to be this like deeply emotional thing. Like maybe like your product solves a problem for them. Like really make that problem clear. Um, Illustrate the solution quickly and kind of like showcase what they will get from the piece of content. So I try to front load a lot and also like think about teasing as well. So that's kind of like the balance. Don't give them everything up front or else they're going to, you know, just scroll a third of the way and then bounce. Um, but yeah, so to me, it's really about the balance of like the hook and then the kind of like tease process as well.
That's really interesting. And I think, again, like Notion does such a really good job at that, because I think like a follow-up question to this could be, sometimes it can be easier to create this type of content when you tell like a more brand story, like more of a, when it comes to like product related content, talking about a new feature, talking about even teasing new features. It can actually be quite hard to just put all these technicalities in the storytelling and in the content you're writing. And I think you're explaining it really well. I have a follow-up question to this because I've seen it already twice in the chat. But what's a piece of content or project that you're really excited, you've been really excited to work on, or you've really loved working on? I personally love what you've done, and I know it's like the broader Notion team, but the whole campaign around For Your Life's Work, I think that's an amazing campaign that you guys have released. But I don't know if that's the one, if that's the project, or if there's one specific one that you're extremely proud of.
Yeah, I can talk about that one a little bit, and then I have another one that comes to mind as well. That was like such a fun campaign. I didn't play a large part in that. That is really like a true testament to our brand team. A couple of people specifically, Kira Kloss and Andrea Lim on the brand team, they just did such an amazing job with that. And it's so cool because Notion is a product that exists in both like people's personal lives and their work lives. And like, how do you kind of like evoke that idea? And like, I think it really goes back to like the human emotion because it's like time, right? You want to spend your time doing something that is important to you, whether that is like on the personal side or at work. So they just did like an amazing job with that. The other one that is pretty exciting to me is we're working on a new-ish series about how we're using Notion to build Notion. So we spend like a ton of time in our product. We basically live in like this like dog food stage. And I think we also like go through a lot of problems, or not problems, but challenges and experiences that other like fast growing startups are going through. And sometimes the solutions are like effective, other times like not as much. We like learn from those. So we want to really like share those learnings. And I think like there's a couple things like going on here, which I find interesting because it really speaks to kind of this meta aspect of writing about like yourself or your brand that I find enthralling, really. Even like when I read like personally, like memoir is one of my favorite like forms because like it's kind of builds a connection right away. So as I mentioned, like we are in that like hyper growth stage as a startup. So we've learned a lot about scale, so we can share those learnings. We also, as I mentioned, use our product a lot, and so we can talk about like how we use our product to solve these problems. It's not always 100% going to be the answer, but that is a little bit of like product work as well that we're sharing. And it also allows us to like leverage our brand as well. So it's both kind of like a product piece of content and a brand piece of content because it taps into like really both of those worlds. And like that helps us create like relatable content because I think like, there's a lot of people who want to probably understand how to use Notion better. We're focusing on our product team for this kind of like set. So I'm sure there's a lot of product teams who want to learn, about like PRDs and processes and things like that. So we're able to kind of showcase that, showcase how our product has helped us like achieve better results from that. But but also like talk about like, hey, like we're going through these same like problems as you too.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm gonna go back a little bit to what you were talking about earlier because I think Chandria's question is very actionable, and I think we would all love some tips on that. But she, oh no, I went straight to Andrea. Sorry. Um, Brands that tell great. Oh yeah, so we were talking about like great pieces of content that you might have seen from other brands as well. Are there any that you have in mind, like other brands, other influencers, even on LinkedIn, you've seen like telling a great story?
I don't spend a ton of time on LinkedIn specifically. I mean, what I find interesting about like the platform is um it's like the ability for people to kind of like write as much as they want to, and often that kind of like evokes a lot of uh people to share a lot, which I think is like an interesting thing, period, that people feel like comfortable doing that there. um I can't think of any specifically. I mean, I know uh, Jimmy Daly was a guest earlier, and I really love
Yeah.
like everything that he's doing around community. Um, I think that that is like super cool, and of course, like being a content marketer, I enjoy like that type of content. But yeah, I think he's really done an interesting thing there because he's had the ability to kind of like speak directly to this user base, while also growing his like company, growing his product, growing his community. And so it's really kind of like, you know, self, like a snake eating its own tail or something. Like kind of has both of those like levels, which I find to be interesting. So yeah, if I had to say anybody, I'd probably pick him. I think he's doing great work.
Good. And if you have all been following the Content Summit since the beginning of the day, you definitely know what chat we're talking about. But if not, the recaps and the replays will be available. You talked a little bit about community, and I think that's really interesting. And I wonder if it plays a role in the storytelling and the content that you create at Notion, because you guys have a community, like an insane community, people who are so passionate about Notion. They create templates, they share templates. There's full blogs about how to use Notion. You're on TikTok now, sharing so many tips. Like the community over there is also crazy. How do you partner with the community team? How do you get all this information and use it back into your content? Like, is there a process behind this? Like the whole, because you're lucky with the community you have.
We are super lucky, and a lot of that credit goes to like early community building. A couple folks like Ben Lang specifically has been in Notion for a long time, has done amazing work with community. A couple folks on his team too, Francisco and Lexi, also do like great community work. But we definitely feel like lucky to have such a engaged and like vigorous community. I think it also holds us to like a higher standard in a way too, because you know that everything you put out, like people will like pay attention to, or at least like a very like I said, engaged group will pay attention to for sure. Um, so like for us, I think honestly, and this is like very like first world problems, it's like we have so much of it out there. It's like what do we choose to use, or like what do we choose to amplify? That is super difficult. Um, but in terms of like how I work with the team, it's really like the stories that we're able to pull out. Um, as kind of like we've grown, the community has also grown, which means like more stories. And again, that comes back to like the focus thing, like what are we going to use, like how are we going to use it? Um, but it's such like a deep well to dive into, and like if you can cultivate that at your company, as like a content marketer, there's really nothing better. um, it's such a great like pool to dip into. um, and like the other thing too is you can like test a lot of your content with like these people as well. So I'd say that's probably like one of the best ways. We have a couple um, you know, community like Slack groups, and of course there's like forums and stuff out there. Like we can share our content and say like, okay, have you all like felt this way? How can we make this better? um, so that has been great. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely not something that we take for granted. Our community is super valuable to us, and as like a content marketer, my ability to kind of work like with individuals in the community and that community team gives me so much like insight, and also helps me like create like empathy. You can see how people are using the product, learn from them, all of that. So it's truly a blessing.
Yeah, and I think it's also so interesting to see that content doesn't necessarily just mean written content. Content is also video. Content is like so many different things. And yeah, you guys have like one of the best community out there. So that must be a joy to work with. There's a question that like comes back a little bit to your intro, which is interesting, and I'm going to share it now on the screen. Being from a journalism background, how did you transition from that writer headspace to the content marketer headspace? And do you have any like very actionable skills, courses that you could recommend?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's one course that I have found like super valuable online, and it's Julian Shapiro's course. You could just like look it up. His like writing course, I forget what it's called exactly, but he has stuff for like long form content, for even for like landing pages, things like that. So I think that's super valuable. I would say like the transition is really in like the framing of how you approach like the problem. Um, so as a journalist, you do not have a motive, I guess, or like a goal. You're really just there to like tell an interesting story. You want to do it like fairly and all of those things. But when you think about like content marketing or product marketing, you really do have like a goal in mind. And like I know I've been talking about like emotions and some of these, maybe like more like fluffy things, especially for like a lot of content marketers out there. But it's important to not forget about like what your job is, what you're here to do. And so I often have like a checklist at the start of every piece that I will go into to kind of like assess it. The first one is I look at like the impact, like what impact is this going to have? What is the goal? Who is the audience? What is the format? And this one's like selfish is how long is this going to take me? um, so in like framing those things, it helps me kind of like transition into that like content marketing headspace. However, like what it does also is it frees up that like journalistic writer like space as well, because now it's like, okay, I've set the parameters of the problem I want to solve. Let me just go in there and like write my way to like solving that problem essentially. So you can use a lot of the creative writing like storytelling techniques, but really having your north star and kind of some of those guardrails around it like gives you the space in which to like solve the problem creatively. i'm like I'm the kind of person, sometimes I'm not so good at brainstorms because I need a box to work in first, and then I'll figure out like how to think outside of that box. And so it kind of feels like that here a little bit. Give yourself that box and then like play within it.
That's an amazing advice. I actually had a follow-up question that kind of follows a little bit what you were just saying, but um, you not necessarily yourself, but like I think as content marketers, we're often thinking like from an isolated standpoint, like I'm creating my piece of content, I'm writing right now. My follow-up question was, what about being a manager, the manager of a content team? Like, how do you foster the culture of relatability in the content, the storytelling? Like, how do you maybe teach more junior people? How do you make sure, even from a broader standpoint, that your content is gonna sit into this box of and this expectation of storytelling that you have? Like, how do you set up a process for that?
Yes, this is a topic that I'm so interested to talk about. I think it's pretty tough. Of course, like I don't have all the answers here, but how I think about like I love teaching like writing. And not like I don't have like formal teaching training, but a lot of this is really kind of like editing and setting up these processes to make sure that content's like hitting goals and folks are focused on the right thing. Of course, I use Notion to do a lot of this. We have a bunch of templates where everybody starts from like the same like set of principles when they do some writing. But I'll start like at the very top, and it's really like you must get buy-in from executives to be able to like do content essentially. Um, Again, that goes back to a lot of Camille's early work. She really illustrated how valuable like content could be for Notion. And of course, like every business like is going to have a different way to use content, but I think that really like sets the foundation for your ability to kind of like build a team, grow a team, all of that. Um, the other way, or the other kind of like couple things that really come to mind in terms of like managing, I think like fostering a culture of feedback is super important for writing teams. Um, we have a value at Notion that feedback is a gift, and I think like the content team is we definitely embody that value. Um, Not only like internally, but also we work so cross functionally with a bunch of different teams that like we're going to get feedback from a lot of people, um, and we're reviewing content. We're going to give feedback too. So making sure that you like foster a culture where like nobody's really like precious about the writing is super important. Um, and then a little more like granularly as part of that process, really making sure that you can like foster somebody's creativity, and like that is super hard uh, to do, especially at like high growth startups when you're just like moving so quickly. We try to have like a content meeting every week. Some of them are a little more like this update driven, but others can be a little more like a like a writer's room or like a pitch meeting. We'll try to do like an offsite here and there to get in like a creative mind space. But again, like you have to make a lot of time like for that. When it comes to editing, like I think you can really grow somebody's writing skill by providing like a context or like a why as to like why you're making a certain change. Um, and I love to do that. I think like here's what I'm suggesting, and my word is not like the Bible. So if this does not sound good to you or whatever, like you can leave it on the cutting room floor. But like here's why I suggested that. So I think like that is super important. It really goes back to like the feedback thing because it helps people develop an understanding, I think, of like institutional knowledge or somebody's we tried that in the past, it didn't work or whatever. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that comes to mind. I mean, like I'm super like I have a great team to work with, so I definitely want to call them out. Everybody has like an area of ownership, and I really like trust them to like run all of these things. With Zoe running education, Michael doing copywriting. So that has been super excellent. And so there's some stuff you can plan for, and others like you just have to hire the right people. So it's a combination of a lot of things, but I hope that like we are able to both help like move Notion's like business needle, and so making sure you're tracking the metrics to do that while also having some fun and being creative too.
I love this. This is so insightful. I lead a content team, and there's definitely so many of these insights that I'm like gonna bring in and see how we can implement them at PlayPlay. So thank you so much for sharing this. I'm gonna completely shift topics now because there's like the $1 million question from Shannon in the chat, which I think all the content marketers out there are super interested to get your take on, which I will share just now. Customer case studies, the one topic that we're like, how are we making this interesting for everybody else? So customer case studies seem like an interesting place to use emotion to hook readers, but it would make it harder to get customer approval for. How do you approach case studies?
Oh my gosh, this is the $1 million question. It's something that we are kind of like learning. First off, funny enough, these were some of the first projects I did when I joined Notion, and now I'm kind of like revisiting them again in like a very circuitous way. I think like I am personally just trying to like push the emotional envelope a little bit. And like we see our customers as our partners as these, or like as part of these case studies. So we work with them to obviously do like interviews and like we also allow them to like see the content that we're going to produce is like drafts and whatnot. So I think like that is a good way to build a rapport. There have definitely been times when folks have asked to like have stuff cut. You can like suggest other approaches, and like again sometimes those will be work and sometimes they won't be, but I think like, and maybe this is just a lucky Notion thing, like people seem to have like an emotional connection to Notion. Like I mentioned earlier, the community aspect, and I think like that's so important in understanding like the emotional reaction to your product. So like I will go into like the forums, I'll go into these communities, I'll go on like Twitter and see like what emotions people are talking about when they're using Notion. And so we have a pretty good idea of like what those emotions are, I would say. The hard part actually in terms of like case studies is positioning the problem that the customer is facing. We've been very lucky thus far. I think like our customers and our customer stories have been like super honest, gracious, um, and like just willing to like showcase some of these problems. Not all customers are going to be like that, but I think like as I mentioned earlier, like uh, this ability to like elicit emotion like a problem specifically, which is like super key to a customer story. Like you have to really like dig in there, and you're going to be more successful at it sometimes than others. So I would just suggest like building a rapport with your customers, being like honest and upfront. And I hope that it all works out from that. Sometimes it won't, and you can kind of like walk it back a little bit. But generally, like our approach is really just like we are partners with you here. We are trying to like tell the best story we can. It's going to be beneficial for you and for us. And we've been lucky enough to, like I said, have some really great partners there.
I actually love that because it means that you're not looking at the customer stories as this is a nice logo. I really want them to like be on my website. It's very much thinking partners and they have a great story to tell, and this story is going to help more people actually use the tool better. I actually really like the way you're explaining this. We have 9 minutes left, and there's one question that I think would be really, really nice to hear your opinion on, which is that not everyone, even as content marketers, necessarily see themselves as like a creative person. So do you have like advice or ideas on how to improve or increase creativity? Like how can we get more creativity in the content we create?
This is such again like something I'm super like excited and passionate about. Just given my background, um, I'll say like the one thing that's helped me is just like writing a ton. Um, and I try to do some like personal writing on the side, and I think like that helps a writer like find their voice. I've been writing for I don't know, I guess what feels like a long time now, but is not really all that long in the grand scheme of things. And I'm still looking for that voice. So like that is one way, but I think the other way is also to just read a ton. And I'm not necessarily like talking about like content marketing. I think like you should find inspiration in other places, especially if you want to kind of like use some of that inspiration in your own like content writing. There's a lot of books on craft too, from like a creative writing perspective that you can pull in. Um, One is called Bird by Bird, which is like a super good like creative writing book. But just like reading in general, like read stories that you find interesting and understand kind of like what makes them tick a little bit. Um, you could even do like essays or something. Um, and then it's like contained, and you can almost do like a book report on it. Now that might sound kind of intense, but it really helps you like dissect what is like working, what is not working, like why the author has like chosen to do certain things. um, so really kind of like tapping into that. I'm trying to think if there's other stuff. I mean, reading is honestly the big one to me. I try to read like different types of books. I'm not a big like poetry reader, but like I find a lot of inspiration sometimes like poetry books because like the format is so interesting. Like there's so many things you can do with the format, that has made its way into like my content writing as well in like some roundabout way. Really thinking about like the form and the function of like what you're trying to do. And this is like my one of my number one pieces of advice to like any kind of like writer is like you're writing something, people are reading it like with their eyes, and again like this sounds dumb, but people are reading it, so you have the ability to kind of like impact like how they take in information. So let's say you want like somebody to feel like hurried, or you want to like show some pace. You can just make your sentences like super short, like a bunch of them in a row. If you want to slow somebody down, you can make your sentences super long. What is like your sentence structure? You want to keep somebody kind of like on their toes a little bit. What is like the size of your paragraphs? Throw some like long ones, throw some little ones in there, even some like one line paragraphs as well. And I'm not talking about like the sales emails that folks probably get, but but you can really have like a large impact, right? If you have like a big paragraph here, a big paragraph here, and a single small one there, like you're drawing attention just by the way that's set up on the page. So yeah, like really kind of like reading and like learning from other like really good writers and figuring out like the best ways to like pull that into your own writing, I think is like some of the best ways to try to like make sure that you're staying creative. And like the other thing too is just like find ways to push the envelope too. Of course, like you're not always going to be able to do that, especially at a company where your resources are limited, your priorities are super focused. But as an editor, I always say that it's I'd rather pull somebody back in than have to push them forward. So somebody can always kind of like say, okay, like that's a crazy idea. Like, what about this like kind of smaller version of it or something? That's a lot easier than saying like come up with a better idea. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about it. And again, just like reading being a big source of inspiration.
I love it. We have another fan of Bird by Bird in the chat saying that it's amazing. So definitely, if you want to check it out, you should. We only have 4.5 minutes left. I think, like as a one last piece of advice from you, maybe if you could, I don't know, summarize some of your top creative writing techniques that you use in your storytelling. What would it be, and what should we all try and start doing tomorrow?
Yeah. Find like the tension and understand like why the tension exists, I'd say is like my number one thing. Really write like a crappy first draft, like free yourself from trying to like sound good on the first one. Just get your ideas out, understand how they connect. A lot is going to change, at least from in my writing it does, from like that initial first draft and to that even like the end of the first draft. So yeah, like cover up that delete button. Be like human and be yourself on the page as well. I think that's super important, and then you can mold it to your like brand voice. Let's see, read a lot, try to pull inspiration from a lot of different places. Remember how like form and function work together. Think about the format of like your writing. And then from an editing perspective, we didn't like touch too much on editing, but I think like that's where a lot of like the most like valuable kind of like writing work happens. Read it twice. So I will often print stuff out, and I use a pen to edit a lot, exclusively a blue pen. Actually, the CEO of Notion, I was doing that, and I was using a black pen, and he's like, "Oh, I thought you liked blue pen." I was like, "Oh, I do. I couldn't find one." He like went to the closet and got me like a blue pen, which was super. He like took the black one out of my hand, which was great. But yeah, read it once with a pen in your hand, and then even if it's like a virtual pen, where you aren't like making any comments, editing it all, just read it all the way through, and then go back and read it a second time, and that's when you can start to like make your edits. So I'd say those things, but yeah, like editing is where a lot of work happens. So I wanted to squeeze that one in at the end too.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I can see in the chat that people have had a great time, and you've shared so many insightful and like great pieces of content that we can read through. I can see people saying this was super inspirational. So thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. Everybody stay with us because we're going to talk to Atlassian just now in 2 minutes, talking about thought leadership. So it's going to be another really, really interesting conversation. Nate, thank you so much again. There's just so many things that I need to rewatch this replay again so I can like take some notes and implement stuff at PlayPlay as well. So this is really cool. Thank you so much. We love Notion. We use Notion at PlayPlay. So keep up the good work, and thank you again for sharing this with us.
No, I mean, Melissa, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who, like I said, like made this happen. Everybody watching, super lucky to be here. So thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.